I want my kids to have a confident faith. I want them to be bold disciples for the Lord and understand what they believe and why they believe it, equip them as well as I can. But I was also in a place where I wasn't prepared to do that.
Hello, everybody. This is Tyson James, president and founder of Sound Faith Consulting. I'm here today joined on another great interview by my friend and special guest, Janelle Gregg, who is the president of the board for Grassroots Apologetics for Parents, a fantastic organization which really seeks to equip parents and other family members to share the truth of the gospel with kids and other family members. So let me bring her on. Janelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Tyson, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so this is just a fantastic organization, and I'm proud to be a part of it. I'm the director of chapter growth, and a lot of exciting things happening with this ministry, and it's been around for a while, so we're going to get into that. But first, let me just ask you a few personal
Sure.
questions, just so people can get to know you. First of all, like I always ask my guests, what is your earliest memory?
It's it's tricky because I don't have a very good memory. Um, but I think, my earliest memory, I grew up, my parents have a farm. They have beef cattle and they always had one dairy cattle or dairy cow growing up. And my earliest memory, my dad is just an epic storyteller. And I can remember sitting in the barn on a little stool while he would milk one of the cows and he would tell stories. And I can remember being really, really little. And that's probably my earliest memory and a very fond memory.
Wow. Okay. And you said you were how old?
I probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
I can remember and I can remember my brother sitting off to the side on his little stool when my dad was in charge of watching us. My mom worked nights at a bakery, and so that would be his version of babysitting, right? He'd be doing his chores, and we'd be coming along, and we'd sit there, and he would tell us stories, and he would just make up stories, but, really sweet memories of that.
Wow, that's super cool. Okay, and were you brought up in a Christian home?
I was, yeah. My parents, and they're still very involved in the church body that we grew up in. I think very typical um, kiddo in a youth group where we did a lot of spaghetti feeds, we did a lot of movies. I was more um, about going to church rather than an actual Christ follower. In through my 20s, early 20s, mid 20s was when I really dug in. I really sought the Lord, and that relationship really came about probably in my early to mid 20s. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. We will get into the Gap ministry in a minute, but
Yeah.
you're basically running this ministry as a volunteer. So, what kind of work do you do as an actual profession?
Yeah. I'm actually a human resources director for a private Christian school. So a lot of people stuff. It's also a really interesting time to be working in Christian education, especially with the temperature of society that we're living in and all the different things that are going on there. But yeah, I really love what I do for a career. I love the relational component, getting to know people, their stories, but also in the realm of education, making sure that we're bringing in people to disciple and teach the kids in our school, our students, and point them to the Lord. Biblical worldview with the academic element also.
Hmm. HR, I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories that could come out of
I
your
do.
experience in HR.
I do.
I didn't prepare you for this question, but what's the hardest part of your job?
People. It's funny. My boss and I, we kind of joke. People are the best part and the hardest part.
Mm,
It's the Lord created us for relationships, so it is a blessing to be able to walk alongside people. But when there are tough conversations, when there are situations going on that are tricky, that's hard. That's a hard part. I think it can be emotionally quite a drain. But it's also there's some moments that are just awesome and a blessing. So it balances out. It balances out.
good. Um, a lot of the people that I work with, they'll say, the professions that they have, kind of on the outside of ministry, or the experiences they've had prior to ministry, really formed them in some way, with tools that they've been able to incorporate into the ministry that they've gone in. So do you find that with HR, you've really taken some lessons from that and been able to incorporate that in the work that you do with Gap at all, or are they pretty separate?
No, absolutely. It bleeds over. I think, one of the really cool things about apologetics is the posture of asking questions, right? The posture of curiosity. And I think that drawing that into a profession in human resources where you're asking questions, you're wanting to get to know that person in front of you. If there's a situation, you want to draw out the information that you're trying to obtain, and get the people that are sitting across from you or in a room with you to think about things critically, to think about the situation maybe from a different perspective. So I would say, um, this type of ministry, the apologetics ministry, has been a huge blessing in equipping me for the role that the Lord currently has me in career wise, also. So yeah, there's definitely crossover
So it's kind of a two-way street. The apologetics kind of
for
affects
sure. Yep.
HR, and HR the other way around. That's really interesting. Okay, very cool. So, also, you're running this apologetics ministry. What was your first introduction to apologetics, and how has knowing apologetics and being involved in this field affected your life?
Mm, so much. My husband and I, when we had our first child, and we were both raised in Christian families. We were both, when we got married, in a very focused place that we wanted the Lord to be the center of our relationship. So we were really a solid foundation there. But when we had our first child, or I guess I was pregnant with her, my husband really had a crisis of faith. And it was the creation account was really tripping him up. And he was really grappling with that and what he'd been taught and raised in, and information that he was presented with. And the Lord provided some really cool avenues. William Lane Craig's Reasonable Faith ministry was a big one for him.
Hey,
There
I
was
know
a
that.
I know, it's awesome, right? And I watched my husband grapple through things with the information, and to me, at that point in my journey, it seemed really cerebral. And I thought, I that's great. God, it's awesome what you're doing. Thank you for providing this for him, but I don't need that. And my husband would say, you should read this. He was so excited about just the apologetics material. And I just was in a place where I said, "No, I don't need that. I've got my faith." Right. And there came a point where one of the blogs that he followed had a shared link or a post from a Christian mom blogger. And my husband put it in front of me and he said, "You've got to read this. This is fantastic." And the Lord softened my heart, opened my eyes to receive that. And I read it, and it was a um, beautifully written mom who was in a similar season of parenting. She was approaching wanting to equip her kids with a faith foundation, but had found apologetics through that and the importance of it. It was Natasha Crane's blog, so it really clicked with me, and I went from a place then of, oh, I want my kids in heaven with me, which isn't a great just place to be, simple, right? To, I want my kids to have a confident faith. I want them to be bold disciples for the Lord and understand what they believe and why they believe it. Equip them as well as I can. But I was also in a place where I wasn't prepared to do that. So I then started digging, and just even still to this day can't get enough, right? If only we had more time to read and grow and learn. And so apologetics has changed the trajectory for our family. I saw it change my husband and help him struggle through those faith doubts that he was having. It's changed my relationship with the Lord and my understanding of Christianity, my ability to engage with others, as well as it's the rhythm of our household with our kids. Our kids are growing up and they have free will, right? But they're growing up with an understanding of Christianity that I didn't have. They're growing up with the ability to have a relationship with the Lord from a perspective and in a confident way that I didn't have growing up. So it has definitely apologetics has changed the trajectory for our family, and I'm very very grateful for that.
Fantastic. So you said your husband introduced you through the Christian Mom blog, Natasha Crane.
Mhm.
Um, so how long ago was that?
Um, it would have been about the time, maybe a year or two before she published Keeping Your Kids on God's Side. So I want to say maybe like, oh, 2015, maybe
Mhm.
2014. Um, yeah, so probably about 10 years ago. And yeah, through that, it was one of those I started following her blog then and she published Keeping Your Kids on God's Side, her first book, and was doing a launch team for that. So I signed up to be a part of that launch team and got that book. And that was just, again, it just kind of opened the floodgates for me.
Fantastic. So speaking to Natasha Crane
Mhm.
and getting into Gap itself, how did Gap come about? How was it formed, and how did you become connected with it?
Yeah. I was blessed to be a part of that launch team for her first book, Keeping Your Kids on God's Side. And at the end of that launch, it was she had shared with the core group of people that did that launch that she had this vision or an idea for grassroots apologetics for parents. She had a vision for creating some sort of chapter or coming together group for parents to grow together. And I was in a season, I was involved for many years on leadership for a moms group at a local church, and it was very clear to me that the Lord was closing that chapter. My youngest was almost entering kindergarten, and there were some questionable theological elements occurring with that ministry, and it just felt like God was saying, it's time to close that and just wait for this next opportunity. And so when Natasha shared out about her idea, I immediately reached out to her and I said, you know what, I feel like this is something the Lord wants me to be involved in. And through some conversation and connections, she said, let's go, let's do it. So we just started connecting and brainstorming and talking through things. We built the Gap board together, brought on some people, and just established and have been growing the Grassroots Apologetics for Parents Ministry since 2018 was when we rolled that out first.
Fantastic. There are other ministries that have chapter programs, Reasonable Faith, Stand to Reason, Reasons to
Yeah.
Believe, all these different ministries. What sets Gap apart? How is it different from these other chapter programs, and what kind of gap, pun intended, do you
Yes.
think that Grassroots Apologetics for Parents fills in ministry today?
Yeah. So yeah, there and it's exciting to see how many more apologetic based resources there are, groups and ministries. Uh, Gap, the mission at Gap or our vision is, we know parents know that their kids are going to be challenged by faith challenges in the world. And really, the vision and the desire of Gap is to come alongside parents and equip them with an understanding of worldview and apologetics to help them then in turn equip their kids. So we really want to help bridge the gap that exists between parents knowing the world will challenge their kids' faith and knowing what to do about that. And so I would say what sets Gap apart as an apologetics ministry is that one, it's chapter based, which there are other chapter based, group settings. It's also directed at parents. It's specifically directed at parents, grandparents, those working with kids. So the target audience is those working directly with kids. One of the other things about Gap is it's not just, although we do have a recommended study path with materials that are readily available. The desire isn't that it's just a book study, just a one and done. The desire is that this is a chapter that's coming together long term, parents who can fellowship and learn and grow together in this parenting journey.
Good. Yeah, when I think about the other ministries that have chapter programs, they kind of all have a distinct flavor to them. Like,
Mhm.
for people who want to get involved with Reasonable Faith, there's just, everybody who thinks of Reasonable Faith, they think of like a certain feel, like, more scholarly
Yeah.
conversations or stand to reason. You're dealing with a lot of young adults who have questions about cultural hot button issues.
Hmm.
So I love the fact that Gap is really intentionally focused on equipping kids or equipping parents and family
Hmm.
members to reach their kids. I think that's such an underserved group in our community, in the apologetics community. And especially when you visit churches and ask them, like, what's being done in the church to equip these kids,
Hmm.
to have a confident faith. It's paltry. It's really appalling how little there is in most churches that Gap is really prepared to serve. So
Hmm.
love that about the ministry. Um, what exactly does a Gap chapter do? What does it look like?
Yeah.
Day to day, or how often do they meet? What do they do during a chapter meeting?
Yeah. So Gap chapters, one of the cool things about Gap chapters is we've set out knowing that there would be different platforms. We really want people to able to mold it to what their setting is. So at Gap, we have parent ambassadors who is simply somebody that has a passion for apologetics. They don't have to be an expert in the field of apologetics, just have a passion for the area and the ability to facilitate discussion, to help organize. And so at Gap, we provide a leader's guide for our parent ambassadors for the studies that a couple of the studies that we have on our recommended study path. And in that leader's guide, we recommend different lengths of study. So typically a 10 or 12-week length is what we recommend for length of study. Again, with the parent ambassador able to adjust that if they'd like to, depending on their platform. Most of our GAP chapters currently meet in churches. And so they typically run on the church calendar schedule. So maybe they'll meet fall through spring once a week. We recommend that churches try and set that up so that it's maybe with a midweek service to help with kid care. Most chapter meetings are an hour to an hour and a half as they work through the study material. But again, we do have the recommendations that we make, but also give parent ambassadors a little bit of freedom to make it work for their setting.
That's good. So you have the recommended materials. What happens when they get through the recommended materials? Do you like provide more recommended materials, or they do they usually just kind of figure that out on their own?
Yeah. So we at GAP, we provide a what we call our recommended study path. And we recommend that all chapters start off with Keeping Your Kids on God's Side by Natasha Crane. It is just a great apologetics 101 book. It's written specifically directly to parents, which kind of sets it apart from a lot of other apologetics material. And it's 40 of the most common challenges into Christianity. So that's what we recommend for the first study. It really gives people the chapters a great apologetics 101 introduction. And then for the different seasons of study after that, we recommend Natasha's second book, Talking with Your Kids About God, which is again written to parents, and it's 30 conversations about God. And it really allows the chapters to set the foundation with those general 40 challenges and then start to go into different areas. So, conversations about God, we have recommendations for if a chapter wants to look into the historicity of the Bible, reliability of the Bible, components, recommended studies about Jesus. Specifically the resurrection. And then we also really encourage chapters if there's something that their group is really interested in digging into, go with that, because it's again truly about bringing the group together for fellowship and growth. Some of our chapters have done Tactics by Greg Kokel is one of their, after they've done the intro studies, because that's a great foundation on how to engage. Jay Warner Wallace has some great material that we have on our recommended study path chart. So again, the first study that we recommend is that Keeping Your Kids on God's Side, because of the Apologetics 101 component. But then our study guide allows and recommends chapters to go other directions.
Yeah. The thing I love too about Gap is it seems like the people that want to get involved, they don't need a whole lot of background information to get started, right? Like
Yeah.
there are certain chapter organizations where you kind of feel like, yeah, you need to have like a really deep understanding of a lot of different fields. But with Gap, it seems like, you know, even if you don't have any background, you can pick up a book and go through the study and really, be learning at the same time as you're, equipping other people. So I think really it's getting people in the door of in being involved in the apologetics community at a ground level, and I love that.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the things when we set up GAP, when Natasha and I initially talked through it, it was we really wanted to limit the barriers to entry, and we're doing some things to even break those down further now. But that was one of the things. We didn't want people to feel like they had to be an expert in apologetics. It's anybody can come to the table. We want anyone to be growing and being equipped with this material. I think that's one of the challenges. Parents aren't teaching their kids apologetics and worldview because they don't know it themselves, and they often feel ill-equipped to venture into the field. So we want to make it as attainable as possible. Natasha, in her most recent book, Faithfully Different, she quotes the recent studies of only 2 to 4% of professing Christians actually hold to a biblical worldview. And George Barna, in his most recent book, Raising Spiritual Champions, where he uses the American Worldview Inventory study that he does, he looks at, I think the stat that he shares is by age 13, your worldview is pretty much established. And so when we're seeing, I mean, it's been 10 years now, I think, since that, the stat of 64% of young adults were leaving home and then walking away from Christianity. And then we've seen that number rise to about 75%. And now we're seeing that 13 and 14-year-olds, only 1% of them hold a biblical worldview. But parents, only 2 to 4%, how can they pass on something they don't have? So through GAP, through equipping the parents, the grandparents, the teachers, the educators, the youth leaders, the hope and the prayer would be that they're growing in their comfort level confidence to equip the kids. So and it's not just about numbers, right? It's a salvation issue. It's going out and being bold disciples for the Lord. But the numbers clearly show what we are experiencing and what we hope at GAP to be able to come alongside and help change.
Absolutely. You know, we have 5 kids in the house. You have kids. Thinking about what they're going to be facing out there as far
Mhm.
as challenges to their faith in a culture that's increasingly hostile
Yep.
to belief in God, and especially Christianity. Uh, there's just not a more important thing that we can do for our kids than equipping them with tools to have confidence in the truth of the faith. And so I think you're absolutely right. This is vital. Speaking of the effect of introducing information like this through Gap, do you have any sort of like stories that have come out of the Gap chapters about and any testimonials of people being affected through these efforts?
Yeah, I think, a lot of our GAP chapters have shared how timely the material has been as a parent in having the conversations with their kids at home. I think, a cool story. We have a couple online chapters for GAP, but we have one that Patty Trotty over at Grassroots Truth runs. She's also on the board along with you and I for GAP, but her online chapters have tended to be a little bit of a train the trainer opportunity, which is really cool. So people will join her chapter, fellowship, grow, and then we have a chapter in the Philippines, for example, that is rolling out and launching because they have been members of Patty's chapter. And that's one of those, you see God moving across the world through a ministry like this, which is just amazing and awesome to see. Somebody in the Philippines is able to get this basic apologetics 101 material, grow in relationship, but then take it to the people in their area, in their town, and go forward with that and equip them. So it's cool to see the, I guess, the spider web effect that is occurring, and that's just again one example of what the Lord is doing through the ministry of Gap.
Fantastic. Wow. The Philippines. That is really
Mhm.
cool. It's funny. So like Sound Faith, we're doing weekly book giveaways, and I would say like at least half of the people who are participating in these book giveaways are in the Philippines.
Yeah,
So
it's
I know
interesting.
you
Yeah.
guys are watching. I know you guys are watching. So get connected with the chapter, the Gap chapter that's opening
Mhm.
up in the Philippines. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So you know, we want Gap to grow. What is the long-term vision of Gap? What do you want to see happen in the next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road?
Our desire at Gap is really just to see people being equipped, parents becoming equipped, teaching their children, equipping their children to be bold disciples. We talked a little bit about the barriers to entry that we had, and we've really evaluated that at Gap over the years. When we rolled Gap out in 2018, our hope was that um, a host church. It was structured so that there would be a host church that would come alongside and allow the Gap chapter to meet there. And our desire for that was, let's tell the church leaders. Church leaders have so much on their plates, but if there's somebody that's in the church, in the congregation or attending church that has a passion for apologetics and can roll this out, the church just needs to provide the facility, and then the parent ambassador from Gap is going to come alongside and do all the Gap related stuff. But one of the things that we've seen is that there we have a lot of military families, for example, that would love to have a chapter, but maybe they move around and so they can't get planted in a church. We have um, a lot of parent ambassadors that approach their church leaders, and whether it's for time and space limitations, whether it's a church saying, you know what, we're not interested in apologetics right now. We don't see they don't see the value in it yet. That there are barriers to entry that we feel like maybe we can lift those a little bit. So we are changing Gap. We're actually rolling out Gap Expanded. And so it will allow people to host a chapter still at a church, but also at a school, a homeschool group or a Christian school, a charter school, as well as out of their home. They can host a Gap chapter or online. And our hope would be that then over the next year and the years ahead, that the floodgates are able to be open. Those barriers are really removed from what they've been for Gap so that this information can be shared. And again, it's that fellowship, it's the growing, it's the equipping. We want to get it out to as many people as possible. So that would be our hope for Gap over the next year and moving forward.
Good. You just mentioned Gap Expanded,
Mhm.
so let's go ahead and dig into that. What is Gap Expanded, and when is that rolling out?
Yeah, it's actually rolling out the beginning of April. So it's moving from that platform of previously when a parent ambassador signed up to host a chapter, they would approach their church leaders and say, "Hey, can I have this chapter here?" And hopefully the church would say yes, but there were times or are times that the church says, "No, we just can't do that, or we're not interested." Gap Expanded allows parent ambassadors to join as a parent ambassador and select the platform that they want to host the chapter out of. They can select to host it out of a church, out of a school, out of their home, or online. So there's now 4 platforms that a parent ambassador can host a chapter from. And again, our hope is that that will just expand, thus the Gap expanded, the reach that we're able to have here at Gap.
Great. Sounds like a great trajectory for Gap.
Yeah.
For people who want to get involved in Gap, what kind of resources does Gap offer for people, who want to get involved, who want to start a chapter, want to become parent ambassadors? Like, does Gap provide any resources for them? I know you mentioned the packet, but is there anything else that Gap provides?
Yeah. So if somebody's interested in joining Gap as a parent ambassador and starting a chapter, my first recommendation would be, prayerfully consider what platform the Lord wants you to venture into a chapter at. It's the church. Church settings are fantastic because you have the facility. There's a lot of support there. There's childcare. Schools, again, similar. There's a lot of support. There's probably kid care. There's facilities. But some people, just due to the season of life, I led a mom's Bible study out of my home for years. On Thursday mornings, there were 4 or 5 of us moms that came with all these little people, and we kind of shove them in one of the kids' bedrooms and have them play. And then we could grow and study the Lord's word, and that's different seasons of life require different platforms. And so, whether it's a season like that or a season where we do have a military family that's moving around and they want to have a chapter where they're based for a little while and then they move on and maybe that chapter continues and they get to start a new one. So equipping more people is really a neat opportunity with this. So if somebody's interested in being a parent ambassador, I would first recommend figure out what platform you think you'd like to host a chapter at. Then head on over to the Gap website, and there's a parent ambassador interest form that parent ambassadors submit, and it kind of just provides us some basic information. It has our statement of faith, the Gap statement of faith, so that we make sure that we're aligning with those that are joining the ministry. And then that's submitted. Somebody from Gap will then reach out to you, to probably our director of parent ambassadors will reach out with next steps to move forward with a chapter launch. And once the host platform is approved, we provide what we call a parent ambassador toolkit. And that has, like we mentioned, the leader's guide for studies. It also has promotional materials. So if you're doing at a Gap, if you're doing Gap at a church or school level, or even online, it has promotional materials to help you share that out and launch that. We also have a um, kickoff presentation that Natasha developed when we rolled out Gap. And the kickoff presentation is, I'm not sure in a home setting how it would look, but for a church or school or drawing in, it really is a great presentation of sharing what apologetics is, what it isn't, and how Gap can come alongside and equip parents to equip their kids. So a lot of great resources. We also have a Facebook page and many, many, many materials that have been developed by other parent ambassadors for teaching through material, PowerPoints, worksheets. So there are a lot of great resources that Gap provides.
Yeah, that's really good. When you're starting something like this or thinking about opening a chapter for anything, it can be a little daunting. You're sacrificing a lot of time and energy to develop resources. So the fact that there are other parent ambassadors who have also developed resources and contributed, and now you're able to share all of these things that have already been created, that's a huge help because then all you have to
Yeah.
do is, go through and incorporate some of that material instead of having to recreate everything or create it anew on your own. Really avoids a lot of that extra burden on
Hmm.
people who are wanting to get involved. So love that.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say too, we actually have a couple informational sessions coming up later in April and one in May that we do every spring. Fall seems to be a great time to launch chapters just because, new school year, it just goes well with the rhythm for a lot of people. So typically in the spring, we provide informational Zoom sessions where we walk through whether it's somebody that's already a parent ambassador and they just haven't quite launched a chapter, they kind of want some more information, or somebody that's new to Gap. and is just wondering, would a parent ambassador role be right for me? Do I want to launch a chapter? So I'd love to encourage people to follow Gap on social media, and you'll see invitations and postings of when those informational sessions would be to get more information on Gap, what the actual process looks like for rolling out and launching a chapter, more specifics on the materials and resources we provide. But it's a great way to be informed and make an informed, prayerful decision about joining the ministry.
Okay, you said late April or May will be the informational sessions?
Yep, yep, yep. We'll have one
Okay.
April 30th and May 19th.
Okay. All right. So if you want to know more about Gap, definitely get connected to the social media pages so that you can stay up to date on get the links for those informational sessions. Looking at the Gap chapters and the people that come
Mm.
to them and be involved, become involved, what do the demographics on that look like? Like what do the people look like that are actually attending these chapters?
Yeah, it really varies, which is really cool. We have some chapters that are moms only. We have some chapters that are couples, parents. We also have a lot of chapters that just are a mishmash of, of a variety of people. My local chapter, for example, we've been meeting since 2018, and we started out, I think our first chapter launched with our first study with like 40 or 50 people. And then, normal attrition, right? And seasons of study. But we have a core group of 15 to 20 that consistently come back, and it's made up of parents, it's made up of grandparents. There's people that don't have kids that just work with kids. And there's a couple people too that just want to be there to fellowship and grow their own faith foundation. So it can really vary. We've had a couple of schools over the years too that have joined GAP to provide the training for their staff and faculty. Not necessarily parents, but staff and faculty. So a GAP chapter can truly look like a wide variety of depending on where it's planted.
Yeah. It would be great, just thinking about the theology of the family. It'd be great, if young people who anticipate having families in the future, they don't have
Mhm,
kids yet, but see the value in being prepared to have those conversations with their kids that they don't even have yet, would attend these chapters and become
mhm.
equipped to not only be confident in themselves and defending their faith, but also for their families later on that they anticipate having. I'd love to see more people pushing, the younger people in the church to think about those things and think seriously about, what does it take to raise a family in the way of the Lord? And I think Gap is well equipped to provide that training. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
love I
Well,
love that, Tyson. And I'm just thinking about too some of the things that have been shared from different chapters over the years. Different seasons of life, even parents or grandparents are at. Right? We have maybe some where children are grown and gone, and some they're little babies, right? And that's one of the cool things that plays in we at Gap because it is directed at parents and those helping the spiritual formation of the next generation. There's a lot of conversation and practical hands-on application for like take home and try this with regards to the cosmological argument. Teach this to your kids, but do it in an age-appropriate comprehension way. And then we invite the participants, each week to come back and share on their homework from the week. And it's really cool if you're a young parent to hear how that's been going at the next stage of parenting, right? So like you say, if somebody came in, we're planning on having kids, we're planning on and growing a family at some point, what a blessing, right? I mean, I wish I had had this information earlier as a parent to grow and just start off with certain rhythms. But yeah, it's really neat, a really neat opportunity for people for our own faith as well as then yeah, taking that and actually applying it in our own household.
yeah. You've already kind of gone over the process of what that looks like for people to get involved and kind of explore starting a chapter. Um, how long does it take to get through that process of opening a chapter?
Yeah, it varies. It varies depending on the platform. Having the last 5, 6 years, we've had host churches only as the platform. Again, part of the Parent Ambassador Toolkit that we provide is what we call a countdown checklist, and it kind of provides a timeline of if this is when you're rolling out, it backward plans. So 3 months before, be doing this. With that said, some churches and even schools, you have to be planning sometimes a year out if you're looking to get space. Uh, you know, Longest case scenario, 6 months to a year, depending on what the barriers at your platform look like. If it's a church or a school that's going to require advanced planning for that space, and maybe you have to go before a board and present the idea for approval. But really, typically, it's about a 3 month planning that we recommend, because that allows somebody to plan well, allows them to read the material through before facilitating the studies. You can plan for a kickoff event if you're doing it at a school or a church, and promote and invite people. So, um, with that said, if you're going to be doing one out of your home, you could probably shore that up just a little bit because you don't need the promotion for that. You probably already have your ideal group that's going to be joining. But we want to make sure we're helping parent ambassadors plan well, to launch a successful long-term chapter. Yeah, I would say three months is a good time to start planning, which is also why we do the spring informational sessions. Because again, that allows plenty of time for fall, to really evaluate and plan.
Okay, sounds good. Janelle, you and I, we both have kids that we homeschool. We have jobs. We do, you know, bivocational stuff, volunteer things. So there's not a lot of time in the day for extra activities. So for people who are interested in getting involved, is there a big time commitment, or is this something that they can work into an already busy schedule?
Yeah, life is full. That's for sure. Um, and you know, we recommend 1 to 2 hours a week for people, if you're facilitating a chapter, and that just allows planning for the study time. It allows some wrap up, maybe sending an email or wrap up conversations with people. So 1 to 2 hours a week is what we see on average for time invested for a parent ambassador. One of the things we always recommend and encourage is if that feels like a lot, or if you're not sure if you want to go in this alone, find somebody to co PA with, find somebody to come along and share the responsibility with. Again, Tyson, like you mentioned, we're super busy season of life. At my local GAP chapter that we host out of our church, my husband, myself, and another gentleman all share the parent ambassador responsibilities. So it lightens up that every 3 weeks I facilitate the study, so that really is a great option. If you're like, oh, that feels really heavy, find somebody to partner with in this journey. That's always a great idea anyway, because you have a little bit of a support and just somebody to rely on and talk through things with. But otherwise, I would say 1 to 2 hours a week is what the typical investment is.
Okay, that's doable, I think. So
Yes.
that's good to know. Who all can be a parent ambassador? What kind of limitations are there on the people who can become ambassadors and can run a chapter? Is this open to both men and women? And is there an age restriction or anything? You talked about the statement of faith, wanting to be unified
Mhm.
on doctrine. Are there any sort of doctrinal restrictions as well?
Yeah, great questions. There's no men, women can both host chapters, either or together. I always think together is a great option, um, especially when it's your husband. So that helps. And but no restrictions with regards to who can join us. No denominational restrictions. Just that the parent ambassador, would need to be able to agree to our statement of faith here at GAP. And those are just basic doctrinal issues that we include in that statement of faith. We have had a few chapters over the years that have asked about including teens
Hmm.
in the chapters. And while the information is great for the teens, we at GAP really discourage or advise otherwise on that because having that dynamic changes the dynamic of the chapter.
Mm,
There are some great resources and materials for children and youth in the apologetics realm, and there's becoming more and more. So there's some great things to pair with. So if your teens, your youth group was doing an apologetic based book, there's probably an adult one that the parents could be going through at the same time at your church, and then you can talk about those things together. But I would say the one limitation maybe is that we recommend it be adults, not children or teens that are coming to the chapters. It's for parents or those working with kids.
yeah. Okay. Well, that's all the questions I have. Let me just wrap up with a final question. What is the best way for people to support the Gap ministry? You've already talked about how people can get involved. How else can they support the ministry?
Prayer. I would say prayer's the biggest one. We need prayer. As you know, we're all volunteers at Gap. So we're all doing this as a ministry because we see the importance and a value in it. But it's also finding balance in life, right? So we can use prayer, but also prayer for God to use the material, that the Lord would reach those that need this to equip them, to equip their kids to be bold disciples for Him. Share out the ministry. We really desire to have everybody learn about Gap and then tap into it and start a chapter. We'd love to see the explosion of chapters as we embark on Gap expanded and new opportunities for chapters to be launched. We'd love to see that just grow and the work of the Lord be done. So at this point, prayer and join the social media pages of Gap and share it out to those that you know, to help equip them and those in their sphere of influence.
All right. Well, you heard Janelle. Please go to the Gap social media pages, follow and share the information that they post there, and be in prayer. That
Mhm.
is super important for all of these apologetics organizations who are on the front lines, trying to equip people, and especially Gap equipping the ones who are raising the next generation of
Mhm.
Christians. So important that they have your prayer support. So great. Fantastic. Well, Janelle, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing some insights on
Mhm.
Gap. I hope that this expands the reach of Gap and that more
Mhm.
people will get involved. I appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Thank you so much, Tyson. I appreciate your support as well as your partnership in Gap. So thank you.
Awesome. And for all you guys watching, thank you so much for joining us. If you appreciate what we do at Sound Faith Consulting, please like this video and subscribe to our channels. We'll see you next time.